everything that happened. The poems, the marriage, the departure, the regret, every single thing traces back to one moment, a private conversation between a father and his son, not a public decree, not a royal order, not a formal command delivered through proper channels. A quiet conversation, the kind that happens between two men who love each other deeply, in a room away from staff and advisors and the machinery of power, where a father said something to his son that changed the entire direction of what followed. Nobody talks about this conversation, not really, because it is the kind of conversation that powerful families keep inside thick walls. But today, we talk about it. What did Sheikh Mohammed really say to Hamdan? What was the nature of that message, and why, when Hamdan received it, did he follow it in a way that ultimately unraveled his marriage? To answer that, we need to understand the two men in the room, and we need to understand the worlds they both inhabit. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum is not a man who is easy to summarize. He is the ruler of Dubai, the architect in many ways of the city as the world knows it today, the man who took a trading port and built a global icon, who made decisions year after year that seemed impossible until they were done, who understood, better than almost anyone alive, that vision without execution is just a dream. He is also a poet. This detail that Sheikh Mohammed, like his son, has spent his life processing the world through verse is not a minor biographical footnote. It tells you something essential about how this family communicates, about the tradition Hamdan was born into, about why, when things become too large for ordinary conversation, both men reach for poetry rather than plain speech. And he is a father, not a simple one, not an uncomplicated one. A father who raised a son to lead a nation, which means a father who had to make constantly the difficult calculation between what was good for the man and what was necessary for the prince. Sheikh Mohammed has always been clear about one thing. Family is not separate from legacy. Family is part of it. The relationships within the Maktoum family, the bonds, the loyalties, the obligations are not private matters to be managed quietly and forgotten. They are part of the fabric of what the family represents. And when that fabric began to tear, when the relationship between his son and his niece began to fray, Sheikh Mohammed made a decision that fathers in his position have made throughout history. He got involved. To understand why the conversation affected Hamdan so deeply, you need to understand where he was when it happened. Sheikh Hamdan had, by all accounts, been living in a kind of emotional compartmentalization for some time. On one side, his official life, his marriage to his second wife, the relationship he had entered publicly and was publicly committed to maintaining, a woman he genuinely cared for, whose intelligence, whose dignity, whose patience he respected. On the other side, Shaker, his first wife, a connection that had never fully resolved, that existed not as a burning active crisis, but as a quiet, permanent presence in his emotional landscape, like a river that continues flowing whether or not you are standing beside it. He had not been dishonest exactly. He had simply been containing, managing the two worlds carefully, keeping them from colliding, believing perhaps that time would eventually clarify what his heart could not. And then his father called, and time ran out. The context for this conversation is important. The UAE had just passed through a period of national mourning. The death of the former president had touched the entire nation deeply, and within the royal family specifically. It had prompted a quiet reckoning with relationships, with legacy, with the things that matter when permanence is suddenly made visible. It was in this atmosphere, one of reflection, of mortality made real, of the urgent human desire to repair what has been broken before time runs out, that Sheikh Mohammed sat with his son. We do not have a transcript of what was said. We will never have one. But from what followed, from the decisions Hamdan made, from the direction events took, from the poetry that emerged in the weeks after, we can reconstruct the essential shape of that conversation. Sheikh Mohammed spoke to his son about Shaker, his niece, a woman who was part of his family before she was part of Hamdan's marriage, a woman whose position within the Maktoum family did not simply evaporate when the relationship with Hamdan had moved into complicated territory. Ishikayach Moimit. The essence of what he said, she is family. Whatever has happened between you, she remains family. And family, especially in times like these, must be tended to. I am not telling you what to feel. I am telling you what a man of honor does. He does not leave wounds unaddressed. Go to her, not as a husband, as someone who owes her the dignity of acknowledgement. Repair what can be repaired, honor what cannot be undone. This was not a command in the traditional sense. Sheikh Mohammed is too wise and too much of a poet himself to issue commands about matters of the heart. He understands better than most that love cannot be directed by decree, but it was something more powerful than a command. It was a father telling his son what kind of man he should be. What havening guard, your father, the man you have spent your entire life trying to be worthy of, is telling you that ignoring this wound is not strength. It is avoidance. And the man of your family, your name, your position does not avoid, he faces, he honors. He goes, when a son who has spent his entire life in the shadow of a father he deeply admires hears something like that, not as criticism, but as guidance, as love, as the quiet wisdom of a man who has navigated his own complicated life and arrived at certain clear truths. It does not feel optional. It feels like the most important thing anyone has ever said to him. Sheikh Hamdan listened to his father. He always listened to his father. And what he did next, traveling to London, visiting Shaker, sitting with her in the city she had made her home, was not a betrayal of his second wife, not in his mind, not in his father's mind, not probably even in the mind of anyone who understood the full complexity of the situation. It was a son honoring a father's wisdom, a man doing what men of his family and his tradition do when told that something important needs tending. He went. But here's the thing about going, about returning to a place and a person that your heart never fully left, that Sheikh Hamdan perhaps did not fully anticipate. You do not come back unchanged. The trip to London was not a closure, it was a reopening. Whatever existed between Hamdan and Shaker, whatever thread had remained unbroken through years and marriages and the official redirections of both their lives, that thread tightened when he walked back into our world. He returned to Dubai carrying more than he had left with. His second wife felt it the moment he walked through the palace doors, and the conversation that his father had started, private, well intentioned, full of the wisdom of a man who loved his son, began its long, slow, irreversible ripple through everything that followed. One private conversation, one father's guidance, and from it a cascade of consequences that nobody in that room could have fully predicted. Ripple 1, Hamden traveled to London. He visited Shaker. He reopened a connection that had never fully closed. Ripple 2, he returned changed. His second wife noticed. The emotional distance that had always existed between them became suddenly, undeniably visible. Report 3, he published the poem. The words his father's advice had unlocked, the feelings a London visit had reactivated, poured out of him in verse that the entire world could read. Ripple 4, his second wife read the poem. She understood. The last thread of hope she had been holding quietly in reserve finally, permanently snapped. Ripple 5, she left, quietly, permanently, with the complete dignity of a woman who had finally received the clarity she had been waiting for. Ripple 6, Hamdan spent months trying to reach her, 4 separate attempts, all of which failed, carrying the weight of consequences that had begun with a single conversation he had not initiated. 6 ripples from one stone dropped in water, and the stone was a father's love for his son. Here is the question I want to sit with before we close. Was Sheikh Mohammed wrong? Was the advice he gave his son, go to her, tend to the wound, honor what cannot be undone, the wrong advice? On one level, the answer seems obvious. Look at what happened. A marriage ended. A woman left. A man spent months in regret. If Sheikh Mohammed had said nothing, if he had left his son to manage his complicated emotional life without intervention, perhaps things would have been different. But I do not think it is that simple. Sheikh Mohammed did not tell his son to leave his second wife. He did not tell him to choose Shaker. He did not tell him to publish a poem or reopen a wound or do any of the specific things that ultimately broke his marriage. He told him to be honorable, to tend to his family, to not leave things unaddressed. The advice was sound. It was wise. It was the counsel of a man who understands that unaddressed wounds do not heal on their own, they fester. What Sheikh Mohammed could not control, what no father can control, however wise, was what his son carried back from London, what emotions the visit unlocked, with the reopening of that connection released in Hamdan, that then had to go somewhere. Good advice received by a complicated heart can still produce complicated consequences. Sheikh Mohammed told his son to be a man of honor. Hamdan tried, and his second wife, caught in the center of that attempt at honor, paid the price. The private conversation that started it all, a father and his son, a room away from the world, words spoken with love and wisdom, and consequences that neither of them fully anticipated. This is how things actually work in the real world, not with villains and heroes, not with clear decisions that produce clear outcomes, but with good people making reasonable choices that ripple outward in ways nobody planned. Sheikh Mohammed loved his son. Sheikh Hamdan honored his father. His second wife deserved better than being the collateral consequence of both of those true things existing simultaneously. And somewhere in that triangle of love and duty and consequence, the full human truth of this story lives. If this video gave you a new way of seeing something you thought you already understood, please share it. That is what this channel is for. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and I will see you in the next one, where we follow this story somewhere it has never been followed before.